My name is Kaiwi, Interpretive Program Specialist with Division of State Parks in DLNR, Department of Land and Natural Resources. We're here at the entrance of Kaiwi State Scenic Shoreline. This very entrance is on the most eastern side of the island, the southeast point of Oahu Island here. Standing behind me, you see this wall that's kind of going towards the ocean. This kind of markates part of the ranch that was established throughout this section of Kaiwi shoreline. So in around 1932, the Davis family was the last to acquire this area and established the land into a ranch. So it was first given to Lot Kamehameha after the Great Mahele, and after his passing, it was willed to his half-sister, Ruth Ke'eli Kolani. So it was her wishes that this land that we're at here would be given to her cousin, Bernice Pahi Bishop. And when she passed, the land was then put into the Bishop estate, in which Damon was one of the trustees for this land. It was through him where the land was acquired by the Davis Ohana, and they had ranching here. So over time, the land ownership, but also the land use has definitely changed. And as we see today, it kind of borders the land property from the state, which is behind us, to the city and county, which is next to us here at Vavamalu Beach. The beautiful shorelines on the Kaiwi, the most southeastern coast of Oahu. So we're gonna go into this section of the state park to talk a little bit more and share some interesting sights about this park. From ranching to off-road vehicles, Kaiwi shoreline has really seen a lot of change to its landscape. This section of the island is one of the more pristine wild coastal habitats we have left on this island that's remained more or less untouched. And as it became a state park, there's been a lot of efforts to help its restoration for the coastal habitat, to protect a lot of the native plants we have here naturally occurring, but also for microfauna we call, or smaller species of invertebrate insects called the yellow-faced bee. And this section has been previously cleared by our partners 808 Cleanups. So they work with us through an Adopt a Park agreement, and they've been working with volunteers every Tuesday to help remove a lot of invasive species, from invasive kiave or klu or even halekoa, really tough dryland weeds that take place in exposed or disturbed areas, which happen to be here at Kaiwi. And the section you see behind me, this hillside, has a lot of invasive grasses, and it used to have larger trees that were brought in from ranching, like the kiave. It was really hardwood, mesquite wood, good for burning long fires, good for today, smoking meats and other types of food, but really prolific all behind this hillside and causes a lot of disturbances to the natural habitat that we have. So they've been working on removing those species and putting in natives to replace them, such as the Milo, that you might see some flagged areas here. And the idea is that this part of the hillside that's really been exposed and changed with invasives, to replace them with natives. That way we can expand the yellow-faced bee habitat that's existing here, and we're helping to preserve for them as well. So there's a lot of efforts and ongoing opportunities for volunteers to come out to work in this site, and it's a really important point to help this area reclaim its natural ecosystem the way it once was. So it's important to understand how these areas are formed, how the state parks were formed, regarding to the geology of this site. And what we're standing on is the base, really, of the Ko'olau mountain, which was once a shield volcano. The Ko'olaus is behind me here. This large volcano was last active 2.5 million years ago. But more recently, there's been activity throughout this eastern shoreline from the Koko Rift. It's known as the Koko Rift. And if we look all the way to the very end, we're looking at Koko Head. So within this area, there's several different tuff cones. Now, tuff is when there's really explosive activity from a volcano in the ocean. It sends off plumes of debris or earth that settles and eventually hardens. And that becomes the shell or the cone of a lot of these remnant volcanoes that we see today. So Coco Head is the very end, and within that is Hanauma Bay, where we can dive for snorkels. It was, the bay itself was once a cone, where the ocean side eroded and the ocean filled that cone, which is now developed with a lot of coral and a habitat for marine life. Today it's a marine life conservation district, so there's absolutely no fishing that took place there. But prior to these newer laws, Hawaiians would fish, like in these areas in Kaiwi, to claim a lot of their sustenance or their food. Right next to it, more commonly known as Coco Crater here, is Kohele Pelepe. So this area is more of the larger rifts, or cones rather, that we have throughout this Coco Rift section of Kaiwi shoreline that we have. And then if we look over where these homes are, right beneath it is a valley called Kalama. There's a lot of other homes that go all the way back and up to the mountains. Actually, in there has another set of cones, and that Kalama crater, the flow that came out from there came out towards the ocean and created this shoreline that we're standing on. So a lot of the black lava that's on the Makai side of the park here is remnant and actually flow from the Kalama crater. And then we come on to this side, we're looking at Makapu'u Head. This is just like the opposite side, Coco Head. This is the very southeastern end though of the Ko'olau volcano. So this whole section of Kaiwi shoreline had a lot of volcanic activity that ranged from 30,000 years ago to 34,000 years ago. So geologically speaking, that's a really quick time and not too long ago that this place was developed. So a lot of the landscape that we see here is formed by not only volcanic activity, but also by the ocean. So this first inlet that we see is Koloko Bay or Koloko Inlet, and Koloko Point stands in front of us here. This is an area that was really important for the traditional Hawaiians that lived in this ahupua'a. This section of the land is actually an ili, known as Mauna Lua. It's part of the Waimanalo ahupua'a, right now inside of the Ko'olaupoko Moku or district that's on the windward east side of the island. So it kind of abuts next to the Kona Moku that we have right past Hanauma Bay. But those that lived in Mauna Lua heavily relied on the i'a or the fish from this section of Koloko Bay, and also the opihi that would be all along the shoreline, as well as the limu that you see. So from here to Makapu'u Head, there's 3 other inlets. The first here again is Koloko. The second with the waves crashing is Ka'ili'ili. And then at the very end, the larger sea spray that just crashed over there is Koho'o Hai. So right above that, in the ridge that kind of climbs up towards the mountain, it's a really important site of Ahipana associated with Pele. And Kapalio Kamoa is the name of that geological structure. And really it got its name because to Hawaiians it looked like Omoa, or a chicken climbing the cliffs. But there's more lelo or story that that's the section, that's the area that Pele left to continue her quest to find the home. So after Kauai, after Oahu, she sat there and made her way towards Molokai. And from there on to the other islands till she finally resides on Hawaii Island. So it's from this area that she leaped out. And this is the most eastern point of the island. And in some stories, the opposite end, the most western point of Kaena in Kaneana Cave is where Pele came out from Kauai. So we're on the opposite sides of the island. One side had creation, and now she leaves to go to the next island. And the distance from Oahu to Molokai, that distance is around 63 miles. And the channel between there is called Kaiwi Channel. That's how we got the name for this park, Kaiwi State Scenic Shoreline, based on the channel between here, Kaiwi or Makapu'u, the point, all the way to Molokai. So those are the 3 inlets on this side that really built, created by the smashing waves, the salt spray, creating these bays and inlets that were heavily used and depended upon by the people in Mauna Lua, Ili. So with the restoration efforts and natural landscape at Kaiwi, it's a prime habitat for the endangered yellow-faced bee, or the Haleas. And this species, there's over 60 different species throughout Hawaii. And over time, there used to be such an abundance of that insect throughout our coastline. It's the main pollinator for a lot of our coastal plants. Over 100 years ago, it used to be abundant throughout here, but because of habitat change, sea level rise, converting lands into developed areas, for example, like Waikiki, we had a lot of habitat loss for this endangered yellow-faced bee. So today, there's only so many natural areas on Oahu that it occurs, and Ka'ena is one of them. Kaiwi here is another site. And to help expand its population, a lot of the scientists, entomologists here focus on creating different innovative ways to support that population of bee. And right over here behind me, we see these wooden blocks. These are nest blocks that actually were brought here from entomologists. And inside, the sticks that you see coming out of them, they're tiny drilled holes that go all the way towards the block. And within some of them have larvae of the yellow-faced bee. And the idea is that these species will be brought from a natural occurring area to here and other parks to help really expand that population. So when they emerge, they can join this population of bee at Kaiwi. Also, all the tiny holes are ideal locations for the female, for the yellow-faced bee to nest in. And so if they happen to go into these areas, that's a prime area to establish their nest sites as well. So what they prefer is usually the heliotrope tree as far as nesting goes. This is actually a non-native species. And as the branches hollow out, that's where the female would go into and lay her eggs. And she would go furthest back into the branching and lay one larva, slid off with like a wax as a compartment, and they would continue to do that till the very entrance of that hollowed branch. And eventually, as the furthest egg emerges, they would eat their way through the other compartments and exiting into the wild here. You know, some of their main food sources that they prefer are a lot of native species like the Pa'uohi'iaka or ilimas. So having these types of vegetation in these areas are really vital for the overall ecosystem, but definitely for this yellow-faced bee. As he was once the main pollinator for our coastlines, eventually, and today it really does play a vital role to expand our native plants here in Kaiwi. So besides the heliotrope tree, the coral rubble at Kaiwi is another important habitat for yellow-faced bee to nest in. A lot of the holes or the pukas inside the coral is where the females prefer to lay their larvae. So, you know, on beaches, people like to move the rocks around. On this particular beach, unfortunately, some people use the rocks, coral included, to make fire pit rings. And, you know, as it burns, of course, the pallets and the nails are left for the Hawaiian monk seal and really dangerous for beachgoers, but it actually does burn and possibly can disturb the yellow-faced bee nest if they're choosing to nest in the coral rubble. So here at Kaiwi, it's important not to disturb any of these natural features or even the nest blocks that have been put in this park.
Kalana Makapu.